conducting plenary sessions, and by the end of the day, we're all going to be a lot more knowledgeable. The first plenary session is going to be about the evolving threats of international terrorism. The second one is going to be about strategic and operational challenges for counterterrorism professionals. The third one is going to be the necessity of timely and efficient responses. The fourth one is going to be future prospects, trends, and opportunities. The guest lecture this evening will not be taking place. Instead, we have another surprise. There will be a presentation here. And maybe General Amos Yadlin, perhaps later in the conference, he'll give us a visit, but he unfortunately cannot make it tonight, this evening. Okay, now our first session, which we're going to begin right away, each individual is going to make a 20-minute presentation. We've got like a 24-second clock down here. It's going to be like the gong show. So everybody gets 20 minutes to make a presentation, and then at the end of each session we're going to leave time for Q&A. That's the whole idea, and nobody's going to go over time, to give the people in the audience a chance to ask questions and to establish a dialogue with the various panelists. So without any further ado, I should mention that on this panel we have distinguished individuals: Dr. Rohan Gunaratna, Dr. Magnus Ranstorp, Dr. Matt Levitt, Mrs. Rifat Manassia, and I'm going to begin by introducing Dr. Rohan Gunaratna, who I think is a veteran of practically every World Counterterrorism Summit that we've held here, and is a wealth of knowledge. Dr. Gunaratna is the head of the International Center of Political Violence and Terrorism Research at Singapore's Nanyang Technological University, which is, of course, located in Singapore. Dr. Gunaratna was a trainer for GIGN France, United States Navy SEALs, CSO Canada, D-88 Indonesia, and other elite counterterrorism tactical units. He visited or worked in conflict zones worldwide. Invited to testify before the 9/11 Commission, Gunaratna has 25 years of operational policy and academic experience in counterterrorism. A litigation consultant to the United States Department of Justice, Gunaratna was United States expert in the Jose Padilla trial. He is the author of international bestseller Inside Al-Qaeda, Global Network of Terror. You see, when you're an expert, you don't need a huge CV. He's like the numero uno expert on Al-Qaeda in the world, practically. So, Rohan, go for it.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to focus on Co-Al-Qaeda, or Al-Qaeda Classic, the group that is based on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. At 9/11, the Western security and intelligence services estimated the numerical strength of Al-Qaeda. Most European security services at that time and the US intelligence agency assessed the numerical strength of Co-Al-Qaeda or Osama bin Laden's group at between 3,000 to 4,000 members. Today, the numerical strength of this group has depleted to about 200 to 300 members. So Al-Qaeda has depleted very significantly in strength. But in the past 7 years, we have seen that many Al-Qaedas have been created. That is, a number of terrorist groups in Asia, in Africa, and in the Middle East have named themselves Al-Qaeda. Most notably, the group in Iraq has renamed itself Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Tawhid wal Jihad, that was led by Abu Musab al-Zakawi. Similarly, the group in North Africa has renamed itself, GSPC has renamed itself Al-Qaeda Organization of the Islamic Maghreb, the group led by Drukdal. So we have seen that many Asian and Middle Eastern groups are not only fighting their local jihads, but they are buying into the concept of global jihad. And Al-Qaeda is still, or Co-Al-Qaeda is still the vanguard of the global jihad movement. So I want to spend the next 18 minutes sharing with you a recent visit that I made to the Afghan-Pakistan border. And I want to share with you a presentation that has not been shown publicly before of the geography and terrorist training camps that exist in that region. But before that, let me give you a very quick insight into what Al-Qaeda was before 9/11 or at 9/11 and what Al-Qaeda is today. So the Shura Council of Al-Qaeda, or the Consultative Council of Al-Qaeda, basically had the head of a military committee, Abu Hafs. He was replaced by Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the 9/11 mastermind, and he was replaced by 2 other military commanders who have been killed. The finance committee was led by Sheikh Said, who was a bookkeeper from Alexandria in Egypt, a member of the Al-Gama Al-Islamiyah. The media committee was led by Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri. It is no longer the case. Now his son-in-law is leading the media committee. The political committee was led by bin Laden. And the religious committee is led by Abu Hafs al-Mauritani. And the security and intelligence committee is led by Saif al-Adal. What is interesting is Saif al-Adal was a colonel in the Egyptian Special Forces. He joined the Egyptian Islamic Jihad. And today both Abu Hafs al-Mauritani and Saif al-Adal are in detention in Iran. Iran is currently hosting about between 100 to 150 Al-Qaeda operatives and about 50 members, family members of Al-Qaeda. This is the structure soon after 9/11. You can see many of these key leaders were incarcerated or they were killed. And this is details of some of the committees that may be relevant to you. The man Abu Muhammad al-Masri, who is there, he was the head of all training camps in Afghanistan. And he was a member of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad. And he is also in detention in Iran today. You can see here in the center of this slide a man called Khalad. Khalad is the head of administration for all operations. He was responsible for the USS Cole operation with al-Nashiri. And both Khalad and al-Nashiri are currently in US detention. You can see how Al-Qaeda also divided their responsibilities regionally, not only functionally. There's a very interesting man here who is Fazul Harun, who is from Comoros, who planned the Mombasa attack where there was an Israeli airliner involved. And Fazul Harun is currently working with Al-Qaeda. Fazul Harun married a woman from Mombasa, and he's a very good specialist in Somalia and in that region. I wouldn't go into detail, but certainly on the panel on Al-Qaeda and the global jihad, we can discuss these structures if people are interested. This is the media committee. I told you it was led by Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri. Now his son-in-law is leading the committee. He's known as Abdel Rahman al-Maghrebi. He's from Morocco, trained in Germany as a computer software specialist. This is the media committee, that media office under the media committee. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, known as Muqta, the mastermind of 9/11, was for a short time head of that committee. In fact, Daniel Pearl, who was killed in Karachi, Muqta was responsible for beheading him. And at that time, they made a video of Daniel Pearl, and soon after that, Muqta gave the responsibility of the media committee to others in Al-Qaeda. Al-Hawasawi was the main man who wired the money for the 9/11 hijackers. This is the structure of the admin and the finance committee. You can see a very well-structured organization. Let me now go to the region known as FATA. FATA is the federally administered tribal region between Afghanistan and Pakistan, where the core Al-Qaeda is located. When the US-led coalition intervention attacked Afghanistan, we saw about 400 members of Al-Qaeda move to Iran, and about 600 members moved to what you call tribal Pakistan. There were another few hundreds that moved to mainland Pakistan. But what is interesting about the movement of these people from Afghanistan to Pakistan is that in tribal Pakistan, they immediately found sanctuary, because tribal Pakistan for the last 40 years have been a very important zone for a number of fighters that have helped the Mujahideen that were fighting in Afghanistan. It's a border of 1,520 miles long. It's a very long border. Al-Qaeda initially entered South Waziristan, and they were in a place called the Shakai Valley. And when the Pakistani military moved there, they moved to a place called the Shawar Valley in North Waziristan. And subsequently, they spread to other regions like the Kuram, Oroksai, Khyber, Mohmand, and the Bajor Agency. For example, Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri's wife and his 2 children were killed in the American bombing in Afghanistan, and he subsequently remarried a woman from the Mohmand Agency. So you can see that the Al-Qaeda elements that were in Afghanistan, they gradually became integrated with the Pakistani groups that are operating in that region. It's a sparsely populated region, and you can see from these slides the geography of that region. There are a number of refugee camps from Afghanistan. There were 6 million refugees and displaced persons. And I will give you some insight into where the Al-Qaeda headquarters is currently based. It's mostly in the Mirali area. Mirali area is a no-go zone for the Pakistani military. The Pakistani military has suffered very significantly in this region. And the communication infrastructure is very sparse. So whatever intelligence that is being collected comes both from HUMINT and SIGINT, but in terms of coverage, it is not adequate to fight these groups. So there's, because of the US cooperation with the Pakistanis, there is very significant collection of intelligence of these groups. These are some of the training camps of Al-Qaeda that have been dismantled. So because the terrain is controlled by Pakistani Taliban is a conglomerate of 32 groups, and they have a numerical strength of about 40,000 fighters. The Al-Qaeda strength is very small. So the Pakistani groups are giving protection and sanctuary to co-Al-Qaeda. This is a Pakistani helicopter that was attacked by a RPG by Al-Qaeda. The pilot was injured. Another Al-Qaeda training structure. Very close to this camp was a camp of ETIM, the Eastern Turkestan Islamic Movement, led by Haji Ali. And it was that group that was responsible for the more recent attacks in China during the Olympics. So it is not only Al-Qaeda that is operating, but there are about a dozen groups, North African groups, groups from the Levant, groups from Southeast Asia, groups from South Asia operating in that region, also groups from Central Asia, like the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, the Islamic Jihad Union. A terrorist vehicle carrying. So you can see there is no ground troops, so many of the operations are using air assets. Pakistani troops, 1,080 troops have been killed, 2,680 have been seriously injured. They have suffered very significantly. 73,000 people have been killed. It's a high-intensity insurgency. This is a cooperation with the US side. I also want to tell you that if you look at last year, the largest number of suicide attacks was in Iraq. The second largest number of suicide attacks was in Afghanistan. And the third largest number of suicide attacks was in Pakistan. And I want to conclude with a slide of Benazir Bhutto, who was going to run for office in Pakistan. She landed in Pakistan on the 18th of October last year. And she was targeted by the Pakistani Taliban group. The head of the Pakistani Taliban group is called Bayatullah Masood. And I just want to show you, as a result of that attack, what happened. About 150 people were killed in that suicide attack. This is Mrs. Benazir Bhutto. She got very scared after that attack. A few months after that, she was assassinated in Pakistan. So let me very quickly give you an insight into the current configuration of threat groups on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border in the next 5 minutes. What we have seen is that what we have basically seen happening in the last 7 years is this. We have seen that the numerical strength of Al-Qaeda has reduced significantly. It is because the United States, Pakistan, and a number of governments are focusing on targeting Al-Qaeda. But in the same period, Al-Qaeda has been able to provide training, weapons, finance, and ideology to about 30 to 40 different groups that it originally had links with when it was in Afghanistan. So in terms of providing trainers, Al-Qaeda has been very successful. And Al-Qaeda's message to these groups in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East is that you must fight the local jihad, but you must also fight the global jihad against the US and their European allies. Today, the European allies has the same status of threat as the US, more accessible to attack, more engaged. So what Al-Qaeda has done is it has spawned many Al-Qaedas. And I also want to tell you that Al-Qaeda's most effective organization today is Al-Sahab. Al-Sahab is Al-Qaeda's multimedia arm. And it was operating under Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, but now his son-in-law has taken over this organization. And if you look at Al-Sahab, last year Al-Sahab produced 97 videos, and before that 42 videos, year before that. In 2001, Al-Sahab produced only 1 video. So you can see a huge investment in the Muslim migrant and diaspora communities in the West through Al-Sahab in terms of politicizing and radicalizing. But also the Muslim territorial communities in Asia and Africa and the Middle East. They have become again susceptible to the propaganda of Al-Sahab. And that is why today we have 2 types of terrorism in the world. One is the type of terrorism that you know, group terrorism. Groups, structured groups with a clearly defined leadership, membership, support base of sympathizers and supporters. But you also have the homegrown threat. Homegrown threat is largely a byproduct of that huge investment by Al-Qaeda and its associated groups in propaganda. But what has happened is the Western nations that lead counterterrorism, policy or strategy or assistance to other countries, they have focused on an overwhelmingly kinetic and lethal approach. This kinetic and lethal approach is an important one to reduce the immediate threat, but it is not going to have an impact on the long-term threat. To fight the long-term threat, it is important to attack the ideology of Al-Qaeda. That is to say that Al-Qaeda and its associated groups are not mainstream Islamic organizations, but they are deviant and heretical groups. Now, in order to do that, the partnership between the West and the Muslim world is so important, particularly between the Western nations and the moderate Muslim regimes, moderate Muslim leaders. And if that partnership can be struck, certainly the ideological campaign can be effective. But unfortunately, this has been a huge difficulty. There is a school of thought in the Western world, particularly in the United States and to some extent in Europe, that if the West works with the Muslim countries, with the Muslim NGOs, Muslim institutions, then that will create a credibility problem for those Muslim institutions fighting terrorism. This is a wrong one, and I want to give you an example from Singapore. In the Specialist Counter-Terrorism Research and Training Center that I head in Singapore, 60% of my staff are Muslims. And of the Muslims, nearly half of them are Muslim clerics. Because today in the fight against terrorism, as much as we treasure our counter-terrorism practitioners who are law enforcement and intelligence, we also treasure the theologians who work with us. Today a theologian is as important. A Muslim cleric, a Muslim scholar who refutes extremism is as important as a counter-terrorism practitioner. So the mission of our Muslim clerics, of our Muslim staff, is to build the platforms to counter extremism in the Muslim community, and also to go to prisons and to counsel the detainees. So Singapore has built a very successful detainee rehabilitation program, and today we are sharing our best practices with a number of countries in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. I also want to share with you that the non-kinetic, the non-lethal approach of fighting terrorism is a more difficult one. One would think that the kinetic approach is a more easy one, but the kinetic approach is one that has been perfected over the years, and governments already have the tools, they already have the trained specialists. The area where they need more thinking and more resources is to wage the non-kinetic fight. And in this area we have developed 6 projects. One is ideological response. Second is educational response, to think of every school, every Muslim school, as a vanguard in the fight against terrorism, to sow the seeds of peace, to counter extremism. And third is financial response. And fourth is developmental response. Next is the informatics response. 5,000 to 6,000 extremist and terrorist websites, but there are less than 100 counter-extremist websites. Most of us today live in the real world and the cyber world, but in the cyber world the terrorists have made extreme headway. And finally, media response. The media is a very important tool in the fight against terrorism. As much as the media has been used to fight famine, to fight disease, to fight corruption, it is also important to work for governments and the non-governmental organizations to build partnerships with the media to fight extremism and terrorism. Terrorism is a byproduct of extremism. If we permit ideological extremism, if we tolerate ideological extremism, we will have terrorism. So in Singapore and in Southeast Asia, policy that we have developed is a zero tolerance policy when it comes to extremism. And I want to tell you that as a result of that policy, as a result of that strategy, today in Asia, there are people, there are institutions that would label leaders such as Abu Bakr Bashir, the man responsible for the Bali bombing, as a terrorist. But before we created a specialist center, before we built the programs in Asia to counter extremism, there was so much of reluctance to call a terrorist a terrorist. They would call him a political activist, for instance. So I want to tell you that in the past 5 years, many structures have been built to fight terrorism at an operational level. That is catch, kill, respond. And in the next 5 years, it is so important, while sharpening those tools to fight terrorists operationally, it's also important to build the platforms to counter the extremist ideology of Al-Qaeda and its associated groups. I thank you very much.